Hi everyone, this week we're going to be focusing on the artist Wayne Thiebaud. He's an American painter who was born in the year 1920. He's still alive today. And this is a project that we're working on with the first graders. This project here we're working on with the third graders. And for our second graders, we'll be doing this one. So we're going to be learning about a few different ways of making these cake drawings. So if you want to skip around to whatever one falls in line with your grade level, works perfect for me. And then 4th and 5th graders are working on this one here. So to get started, we're going to begin with our first grader drawings. The first thing that we're going to be doing is drawing 3 ovals. I'm going to have 2 in the front and 1 in the back. I'm leaving a decent amount of room at the bottom here so I can have the bottom of the cake. So leave some space there. I'm using pencil, that way I can erase, get these just how I want them. And then I can sharpen up those edges once I know what I want. Erase, erase, erase. A lot of his artwork focused on repetition, so that's the one feature that we're looking at today, and variation. So they're each going to be a little different. I'm drawing lines down from each edge. However tall these lines are is going to represent how tall our cakes are going to be. I'm adding a rounded edge at the bottom of each of these cakes to complete our cylinder. And then I'll add a plate behind it. I'm starting a little bit behind the cake, circling around the front, and then coming around from the back. And that's why we use pencil. May take a couple tries, and that's totally okay. Alrighty. The last thing that we're going to be doing fully together here is this line that's in the back. That's called our table line, so now our cakes are sitting on a surface. Once we get to that step, you guys are free to decorate these however you want. I'm showing you a few different ways, few different options, similar to the ones that Wayne Thiebaud drew. I want to make sure I have at least one kind of decoration on the top and one kind of decoration on the side. That way these are pretty intricate and they look really interesting to look at. That one I had a little kind of dollop of whipped cream on top. I had these kind of like wavy, kind of looks like a wavy donut on top of the cake there. It's a good way to add icing that goes all the way around. Adding a scalloped line and some polka dots to finish off that cake. I'm going to be adding in a background, so I'm using stripes on the wall, and then I'll be coloring in the background on the table. To make these look a little bit more 3D, we're going to be using an element of art called value. So this just means that each object shows some lightness and darkness, so it looks like there's light and shadow. So I'm doing this just by pressing down a little bit harder when I'm coloring in the sides, and then leaving some lightness in the middle. So just not pressing down quite as hard when I get to the middle there. I like to outline the space that I'm going to draw, start coloring in the darkest parts, and then lightly coloring in the middle, and then just blending it out in between. If we have crayons or colored pencils, this is something that we're going to be able to do. If we don't have crayons or colored pencils, we can kind of have a similar effect using the markers. If we use like one layer in the marker and maybe a couple on the sides, it's up to you. You can play around with it, see what works. We want these to be really bright and colorful, just like Wayne Thiebaud's. So that's why I'm really going crazy with these kinds of colors. Not quite with the chocolatey brown, but I thought that would be a yummy kind of cake. Next, I'm coloring in my plate. If you guys want to decorate your plates, you can. Make them a little special. Go for it. You can have lots of fun making these your own. We skipped a little forward, so we didn't have to watch me draw every single one of these. But there's some different kinds of design ideas, ways that you can color it in. I'm just shading in the background with my blue crayon. I traced around all of my cakes just so then I wouldn't color over any of it. This is sped up, so my hand doesn't actually move that fast. That would be crazy. So this might take you guys a little while to fill in the background, and that's totally okay. I think it looks really nice. If you want to use marker in the background, that would be a great place to use it, because then it will help just move the whole background process a lot faster. Then I'm drawing in some dots just to make it a little bit more interesting to look at. Lastly, I'm just going to be coloring in the wall there. I chose to do stripes just to have another pattern in here. If you wanted to add checkers or any kind of pattern in the background, you can. It's up to you. There's one with stripes. Awesome. So if we are in second or third grade, if we're in second grade, we're just going to be focusing on one. If we're in third grade, we're doing all three here. So we can see some of the different kinds of designs that we have to choose from, some different kinds of flavors to add on the inside. So if we're in second grade, this is a better representation of what those will look like. If we're using marker, we can use yellow and orange to show the difference in shadows. So here we are going to get started. The first step here is to draw 3 lines. So I'm going to do 2 in the front, starting in the middle of my page and then heading down, and then 1 smaller line in the back and in the middle. I'm going to turn these into Ys. Then I'm going to use the same kind of line for my Ys on the bottom. That's why we do this with pencil, that way we can erase, change things as we want. Then I'm drawing a line down to connect each edge. And then now we kind of have like a book shape. I'm gonna erase any of the lines that are just past my cake. And then I'm turning it into a slice of cake by just adding a curved line on top. To add a layer of frosting, I'm using the same kind of V shape that I have on the top, on the bottom. If you want to have multiple layers of frosting, you could do that too. It's up to you. Next, I'm drawing a plate around each slice of cake here. So I'm starting just a little bit behind the cake, and then I'm swinging all the way around, circling the front, and then tucking my line back behind the cake. My last step here is going to be to draw my table line. So that's just a line that goes all the way across in the back, so now our cakes are sitting on a surface. To add a layer of frosting, I'm using kind of like a cloud-shaped line. And then I'm going to erase the line that went through the middle. For my dollop of whipped cream, I started with a curved line at the bottom, scooped it around this front, and then added just the tiniest wave. If you want to make our cakes look like there's a lot of icing on there, we are going to make it a wavy line, so then it looks like the icing's like dripping off the cake almost. A lot of Wayne Thiebaud's art had a lot of different kinds of fruit on it, so that's why I chose to add a little blueberry on there. He used a lot of different kinds of like cherries, things like that. If you want to have sprinkles, you can. Once we get to the step of decorating, you guys can make them your own. They do not have to look like mine, but these are just some ideas. So we're focusing on value today, so that means that our cakes are going to have a light side and a side that's in shadow. Right now I'm coloring the shadow side, so it's making pretty dark. I'm maybe doing a couple layers over here so then I don't see too much of that white paper peeping through. On the side that's in the light, I'm using a much lighter kind of hand just to shade this in. It doesn't have to be super duper light, but at least a little bit lighter than this side that's in the shadow. And the same rules are gonna follow for your icing here. I'm lightening up my pencil lines with my eraser because sometimes with those light colors, you can really see through kind of in the middle there. I didn't do a best job erasing that line, so it's kind of sticking out. Well, that's all right. I like to outline where I'm gonna draw, and then I like to start filling it in. Just that way it helps me stay in the lines a little bit better. I like to do the same step for my light side, because sometimes we'll even have a little bit of shadow just on the edges of objects, so it's alright if our edges are a little dark and then the most of that surface is still pretty light. I'm adding a little bit of shadow underneath that blueberry, so then it looks like it's really sitting on top of the cake. The shadow's on the same side as the shadow of the cake, so it all makes sense and follows the same kind of light. Lastly, shading in my blueberry the same way with the shadow darkest on the side of the same side that my cake is shadowed on. Then I'm gonna color in my plate. You guys can come up with different kinds of designs or patterns. It's up to you what kind of plates you want to have, what kind of cakes you want to make. You guys can come up with new flavors if you want to. I've seen some really creative flavor suggestions this week. It's been super fun to make these with you guys. I said. So you can see I'm adding a bit of a shadow on the shadow side, just darkening up that green so then it kind of makes sense with the rest of the cake. So then this side is a little bit lighter because it's on the light side of the cake. All three slices should have the same side that's the shadow, so if I put my shadow on the right side, it should be on the right side for all three slices. I'm adding a little bit of an outline just so it kind of has a lip to my plate, so it looks like it's a little bit more realistic. I decided to decorate it with some polka dots just to finish it off. Alrighty, so I'm moving on to the last cake that we're making today, and this is the one that our 4th and 5th graders are working on. So I'm starting with a pretty big oval towards the top of the paper here, and that's going to be the top of the cake. I'm just sharpening on my edges, erasing. We're working with pencil, especially in this beginning step, just so we can plan, get things how we want them. However tall these lines are going to be is going to be the height of our cake. So I'm finishing out my cylinder with 2 straight lines and a curved line at the bottom. I'm drawing 2 straight lines, one on each side of the cake, drawing a point in the middle and connecting the top of each of those lines to the point. And that's going to be where my slice is cut out from. I'm erasing that line, drawing a line all the way down, but not quite. I'm repeating the same kind of line on top that we have on the bottom there, so kind of matches up, so it makes sense that it would be the same slice that's cut out. I'm adding the plate underneath. It's pretty much just an oval that circles the bottom of the cake there. So now I'm adding a little bit of icing all around the cake. It's kind of like a cloud almost. I'm adding a little dollop of whipped cream. It's kind of like a backwards C, and then a little wave at the very end. I like to go over the edge of the cake a little bit when I'm making these kinds of piping works. That way it looks like it's really hanging off the side of the cake. Adding some drips. And then now I'm adding in some cake layers of frosting. So I'm using the same kind of diagonal lines that I have up top and the bottom for my frosting layers, so they kind of match up with the rest of the cake. So we're focusing on the element of art this week called value. So value just means that an object shows lightness and darkness, lightness and shadow. So where I'm coloring really dark is going to be my shadow side, and then the opposite is going to be the side that sees the light. So that's why I'm shading a bit lighter here, just so we can really see that difference. I'm coming in, and you can add berries on the inside, you can add chocolate chunks, like confetti pieces, or sprinkles, just to add some color and texture. You could add swirls if you want to, marbling. There's rainbow cakes now, so you guys can really make your cakes whatever kind of colors, flavors you want. It's up to you. My frosting layers are going to follow the same rules as my cake. So it's dark on the dark side and then light on the light side. I'm lightening up my lines because sometimes colored pencil or crayons like to kind of show the pencil line through if I leave it there. So that's why I just got rid of it. I'm using a darker kind of shade, using some harder pressure on the outside of my cake and then lighting up towards the middle. And then I'm blending those two together. So that way these can feel really round and 3D. So I had a lot of similar kinds of cakes, so we're gonna see a few different ways that you can make this, and then we'll be continuing on. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can choose to decorate this cake. It's totally up to you. First thing I like to do is outline where I want my color to be filled in. That way it's just easier to stay inside the lines. I like to start with my darkest shade and then do my lightest. That way I know where I need to blend in between, so nothing's gonna get too dark too quick. So now I'm just trying to gradually blend the two together the best I can. Alright, so now I'm coloring in the drip, so I'm kind of following the same rules, so I didn't really trace out my outlines this time. Since I was using a pretty light color and the purple was already there, kind of made sense. So starting with my darkest and then moving towards the light in the middle. If it ever gets too dark in the middle and you're using eraser, or you could use an eraser to help you lighten it up. If we're using color pencils or crayons, I think it will work a little bit. So tracing out my lines here, shading the sides darkest and then the middle lightest, and then blending the two together. But so now you can really see how that icing kind of like pops out from the side of the cake. I think it makes it really kind of stand out from the rest of the cake. Some people made their cakes different like themes. If you wanted to come up with a theme for your cake, that could be a fun way to do it. It's up to you. Once we finish coloring in the cake, we can start thinking about what we want to see in the background. We want to make sure that we add that like horizon line or that table line that goes all the way across in the back. That way we have room for a background, and then also it shows that our cake is sitting on a surface and it really grounds the cake. So following the same kind of rules that I set up for myself here, tracing the lines and then starting with the darkest and then moving to the light. I'm showing some shadows here on the right side, which you'll notice is the opposite side of where I have my shadows on the inside of my cake. And that's because the light is coming from the top left there. So that means that most of the cake is blocking the shadows that you'd see on the inside. Finish shading these in. To make these look nice and fluffy, I'm using circles when I'm coloring them in, and they're getting smaller as I get closer to the middle. That way it kind of looks like it's a fluffy kind of texture here. I'm still really outlining my lines because this is a really light color, so I want to make sure that they still stand out. Using those circles. And last but not least, I'm just shading in my little dollops of whipped cream. I decided to dye them a little pink. So then just another pop of color to have on top of this cake. I'm gonna color in my plate next. You guys can decorate your cakes if you want to add like a wavy layer around the outside of that plate, you can. That could be a really nice way to add a little bit more decoration, make it a little more elaborate. If you have some extra space down there, I'd recommend doing that. So I'm keeping the light side, the left side of my cake light, and then we can see I'm going to start to shade kind of the inside of that slice and also the right side of the cake. Just to kind of make that shadow come all the way through the whole piece. I'm trying to follow the direction of the plate, that way my lines don't look too out of place. It's always a good rule of thumb to kind of just follow the shape of the object if you want to make your drawing look realistic. Lastly, I'm just coming in with a little bit darker of a color to help add a lip to the plate here. So it makes it look a little thicker, like it's not just like a placemat or something. You could do the same thing with like the color that I would have already been using if I just did like a dark layer on the side. But I think using a different kind of color made this really stand out. It got a little thicker than I was intending, but I just went with it. You know, gotta roll with the punches. Alrighty, and then I'm adding a little loop-de-loop around the edge just for some extra detail, make it a little extra fun. And that is the plate there. So the last thing that I'm gonna do is draw in the background. I'm gonna draw some checkers for the background. I think that's like a really kind of fun way to make this feel like a diner or like a restaurant. So I just did straight up and down, side to side, vertical and horizontal lines here. So my checkers are straight up and down. If you wanted to do diagonal checkers, you definitely could do that too. This just seemed kind of simpler. And I like the look of it too. If we wanted to leave it just like a grid pattern, that could be cool too. So then when I'm coloring in this, I just want to make sure that all of my colored in pieces are not touching each other. They're just touching in the corners. So I'm going to move around the whole piece, just filling in every other box. When I'm coloring in my checkers, it's good to try not to like jump all around the page, because then sometimes I might mess up my pattern. So I'm really trying to stay close to the ones that I've already done. That way I'm not losing my pattern that I have here. So I'm working my way down and then around. Obviously this is a sped up, so take your guys' time with it. Took me a little while to get this done, but it's kind of soothing. It's alright that it takes a little bit of time. I think it looks really nice. Adds a really cool like graphic touch to the background here. That's it. So then the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be experimenting a little bit with these watercolor pencils. So when you see me color in this next bit, I'm a little rough on purpose, kind of. So because I know that I'm going to be going over it with water, I'm not being quite as careful. I'm being careful around my edges, but once I get to the big kind of stretches, I know that it's going to even out once I add the water to it. When we're using watercolor pencils, we should always use them first like they were just regular color pencils. And then once we have everything kind of decided, then we'll go over it with the water, just like you would with watercolor. I wanted to make my corners a little bit darker, so that's why I'm doing a little bit of shading around there. So then it really looked like my cake was the center of attention. Grabbing my water, being careful around those edges. I would start with a light amount of water, and then if you realize you need more, you can always get more water. But if I grabbed a bunch of water, especially if I was really close to those edges, it might bleed into my artwork, and I didn't want to do that. So that's why I'm being really careful when I get close to my artwork on the bottom. Alrighty, so there is the finished piece. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. We'll be working on these next week, so if we don't finish up this time, it's totally okay. See you then. Bye.